Hello, everyone. How's your day? I hope you all are doing absolutely fine. Welcome to the Revenge Arc. Today we have one story from our slash pro revenge and three stories from our slash petty revenge. And of course, since they are revenge story, all are quite satisfying. Enjoy! The first story is from our slash pro revenge.
Cheat on your wife with mine? I will burn your life to the ground. Way back in the early 2000s, I began to suspect that my wife was up to something. Our two kids were about 4 and 6, still young, but not so young they couldn't tell you something about what had happened in their day. They started talking a lot about staying with my wife's parents during the day, which wasn't really that strange in and of itself, but since they lived about 90 minutes away, doing so 2 or 3 times a week seemed a bit much. That was basically every day she wasn't working at her part-time job. When I asked her about it, she denied it, but was never a good liar. So, I started tracking the mileage on her car, and sure enough, she was driving an extra 400 or so miles per week. I knew some shit was going on. Then one day I sat down at the computer, and she had left a sticky note with her AOL password written on it next to the keyboard. I could not resist and logged in to read her emails and saw a few email exchanges between her and her college BFF, where they discussed how my wife was regularly fucking one of her ex-BFs from high school. No mention of details about him other than my wife also talking shit about his wife, making fun of how she'd gotten fat after having kids. Anyway, I printed out these email exchanges and stashed them. I still needed to know the details, so I called a friend who was a cop, and he suggested I call a guy he knew that had left the force to become a PI. Ron was great. I paid his retainer and gave him the emails and what little I knew about my wife's activities, and he figured out exactly what she was doing. His report detailed with photos and time/dates/locations all about how she would take the kids to her parents, then go meet this guy for lunch, then they'd go to a dumpy motel for a few hours, after which she'd pick up the kids and return home. At this point, I hired a divorce lawyer. My parents cheated on each other, and the fallout absolutely fucked mine and my siblings' childhood. It was something that was totally unacceptable. I also asked Ron to find out what he could about this guy. Ron absolutely came through. I learned his name, Bob, that he was married and had 3 kids. I also found out that he worked as a VP of sales for his father-in-law's business. At this point, I had my lawyer draw up the divorce papers. I also asked Ron for a couple more copies of his report, and one more thing I wanted him to do for me. On the same day, I had my wife served with the divorce papers at her work. I had Ron meet with this guy's wife and show her everything he'd found out. She seemed nice, and I figured that she deserved to know what her dear hubby was up to. What she did with that information was up to her. While the information about my wife's infidelity didn't really matter in my divorce proceedings, Bob's wife did a real number on him. According to the publicly available court documents from the divorce and other related proceedings, she cleaned out their joint account, took the kids, and left. As soon as her dad found out what he'd done, Bob was fired, and since her parents actually owned the house where Bob and his wife lived, he also got evicted. Their divorce was ugly. Lots of fighting in and evidently out of court. I guess Bob went to the house and started arguing with his wife, and it escalated to the point that her brother stepped in and Bob got his nose broken. There were restraining orders, a few more incidents with police reports, criminal charges, jail time, and so on. I can't find Bob on the internet anywhere these days. Last I heard, he'd left the state and his ex-wife did okay. She went to work at her dad's company and took over after he retired. As for me, my ex and I got along well enough. I didn't engage with her on anything that wasn't related to the kids, and now that they're both adults, I don't talk to her at all anymore. I don't hate her or anything, but I only care in the context that she is my kids' mom and is important to them. Nothing beyond that.
This is a compelling and intense story about betrayal, investigation, and ultimately finding closure. It's clear that you went through a deeply painful experience, but you handled it with a methodical and calculated approach. The way you took control of the situation by gathering information, hiring a private investigator, and confronting the truth, while keeping the focus on your kids, shows resilience and a sense of responsibility.
The time Scottie Too Hotty got in the house. When I was around 8, my mom and I moved in with her boyfriend, who had shared custody of his 2 kids. His son was 2 years older than me, and his daughter was 4 years older, and they did not like my mom and I in their home. They bullied and teased me, but I didn't really understand what was happening at first. They would dare me to do super dangerous stuff in hopes that I would get hurt or in trouble, like jump off the roof or climb a 10-foot spiky fence, ride my skates down an outdoor staircase that lead to a busy street. When they volunteered to teach me how to ride a bike, they just kept crashing me on purpose and laughing. They invited me to a sleepover and covered me in honey and peanut butter when I fell asleep first. The daughter was really into cats. She had an outdoor cat named Scottie Too Hotty, after her favorite wrestler, and she would sneak him in when the adults were gone, but she had gotten caught and in trouble for it. I, being a weird little kid, used to enjoy mimicking accents and animal sounds. I told her I was practicing my meow and asked if I sounded like a cat. She told me no, I sounded nothing like a cat, I sounded stupid. I had gotten feedback from others it was a good meow and had a feeling she was just being mean because I was looking for an excuse to interact with her. I held on to my growing resentment, and sometime after that incident, the daughter and I were left alone in the house. When she was in her room, I told her I was going to play in the backyard. Then I faked that I had accidentally let the cat in. She got upset because she didn't want to be grounded again and demanded we start looking for the cat. So I pretended to help, going from room to room, then hiding and letting out a meow. She would rush to the area she thought she heard him, and I would sneak to another area. We did this for a while until we heard our parents' car pull up and she started freaking out. She was yelling at me from another area of the house that she was not going to get in trouble on my behalf. I hid under the bed in our parents' room and meowed, and she said something like, "Scotty baby, please come out, I don't want Dad to get rid of you," and crouched to look under the bed for him. When she saw me, I said, "I thought you said I didn't sound like a cat."
That ended a little abruptly. Anyway, it sounds like you were dealing with a difficult and unfair situation where your step-siblings made life challenging for you. Their bullying and dangerous pranks clearly had an impact on your childhood. And your act of getting back at the daughter in that moment seems like it was a form of revenge or asserting some control in an environment where you likely felt powerless.
Cadillac driver learns a lesson. This happened back in the very early 70s. Not my story, but I own the truck involved. I grew up in Glendale, Arizona, as did my father. My grandparents bought their home in 1955. But my grandparents hated living in town, and after all their kids were grown, bought property near Kingman, Arizona, where they eventually built a house and moved. During one of their trips to the property to build, my dad drove them up, stayed the weekend to help build, and then drove them back home. On the way, they stopped in Wickenburg, Arizona for ice cream. Dad pulled in, parked, and everyone got out to get their ice cream. There were no other vehicles in the entire parking lot. As they were ordering, a brand new Cadillac rolled in, and rather than park in any one of the empty spaces, he parked directly behind my dad's truck. Dad didn't say a word, just climbed in and buckled up. When he started the engine, my grandmother says, "Son, there's a car behind you." "Dad, I know, Mama." My grandfather starts to grin. Dad puts the truck in reverse and very slowly starts to back up. Grandma louder and more insistent. "Son, there's a car behind you." Grandpa starts to chuckle. As soon as Dad felt the bumper's touch, he shoved the pedal to the floor, spinning the tires, slinging dirt and gravel, and shoved the Cadillac almost out into the street. Grandma is throwing a fit, Grandpa is dying in laughter, and Dad just puts it into first and calmly drives away, smiling and waving at the caddy owner as he left.
This story paints such a vivid picture of a moment full of tension and humor. It sounds like your dad had a calm and composed way of dealing with an arrogant or inconsiderate act, using his truck and his driving skills to send a message without saying a word. The Cadillac owner must have been completely shocked as your dad not only backed into him, but pushed his car out of the way so casually. And yeah, that was quite petty, and I hope the truck is fine.
One of the funniest things my brother ever did. Way back in the dark ages of 1989 to 90, I was a senior in high school. I was a huge nerd, and as a senior, I got my first girlfriend. We're still married to each other. We were at a school dance either December or January. I know it was freaking cold. I was hanging out with my girlfriend, her friends, and a few of my friends. This other kid rolls up and says some shit that makes my girl cry. My little brother and my best friend get a look on their faces and walk away. They come back a few minutes later and tell us they'll be right back. They leave the dance. They come back in 10 minutes later, stifling laughter. I finally get them to tell me what they did. They went out and pissed all over the kids' car windows. It was cold enough it froze almost immediately. Later, when the kid and his date went home, they'd have to scrape the windows to see. I can't imagine how bad he smelled once the piss ice that got all over him melted.
This story is hilarious, short, simple, petty, and quite satisfying. I like it. Hey there. If you've made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for sticking around. Your support means the world to me. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. It really helps out the channel. And if you want more content like this, make sure to hit that notification bell so you'll never miss an update. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay fine.